Welcome to the 18th episode of Adventures in Fly Tying with Fly Fish Ohio. Thanks for joining us. Today we are going to tie perhaps one of the most productive flies in all of fly fishing for trout. We're going to be tying a traditional soft hackle in the North Country spider style. Today we're going to be tying yellow and partridge, which is just a beautiful pattern. And as you can see, we can tie it in a couple of different ways. I have it tied with a thorax, a lightly dubbed thorax, or traditionally it's tied with just a very thin thread body. This is a simple pattern. It dates back several hundreds of years. It can be tied in a number of different colors. A couple of my favorites would be partridge in orange, or partridge in green, or partridge in yellow. If you're going out to fish the sulfur hatch, of course the partridge in yellow is very important for either a drowned adult or emerging type fly. The flies themselves are very simple in terms of materials, but you really want to use some of the best materials that you can find. And first and foremost, that means the body of the fly should be tied of a real silk. The traditional silk, at least for the last 100 years or so, is Pearsall's silk thread, which is made in England, and yes, you can still buy that. Today I'm using those small half spools of the Pearsall's Primrose Yellow, and I'm using this in a Crest Tools midge bobbin, ceramic midge bobbin, which is the only one I've found that really works well with these thread spools. I really like that a lot. The partridge in color is always tied with a Hungarian partridge skin, and that's where you start with this particular pattern. Now, the feathers that you're going to use to create this soft hackle usually come from the shoulders or the upper portion of the wings of the bird. And when you're tying a partridge in orange, you would use the darker brown patterns right there. When you're tying a partridge in yellow, you want to use lighter gray. That's just traditionally the way it's done. Of course, I don't think that the trout have a huge preference, but this is the traditional way that you tie this fly. If you're going to tie it with a dubbed thorax like we are today, you want to use a little bit of moleskin. Moleskin's very soft, very fine, very easy to dub. And to dub this correctly, you want to use a very soft dubbing wax, a very soft beeswax. You don't want to use a hard wax, and you just want to use a very small amount of it. And that's actually what we're also going to use to finish off the head instead of using some kind of a lacquer or head cement, because the trick with silk thread is silk thread will actually change color when it gets wet. So even though it may look too yellow to be very natural to us right now, it'll turn a much darker shade when it's wet, and the wax will prevent it from changing color, whereas a lacquer will cause it to permanently change color, and it won't have that translucency that silk is known for. Soft hackle flies are tied on a number of different hooks. Today I'm using a Mustad 94 480, which is a standard dry fly hook in size 12. You can also use a 3906B, which will give you a little bit more metal to get it down a little bit deeper. You'll also notice I'm tying on a different vise today. This is a peak vise. We just finished at flyfishohio.com our very first major shootout where we reviewed more than 20 vices, and I am really enamored with this peak vise. It's a full rotary vise. It's spectacularly machined. I got to tell you, this thing really caught my attention, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of it in these videos because I love the way that it works, especially as I get to understand true rotary tying with the things that this can do. But what a great tool. Here's how we start. You want to start with your thread right behind the eye of the hook. Run a single layer of thread all the way back to a point right above the hook point. And it just can't be any easier to tie the body of a fly than by making just a couple of layers of silk thread. Clip off your tag end very carefully, having all of your thread wraps butt up against each other. Make a nice smooth body back up to the tie-in point where you're going to tie in your hackle feather. And that's going to be right behind the hook eye. That is all the body that you need. Now what I've done is I've prepared a hackle feather by selecting one with barbs that are just a little bit longer than the hook shank. I'm going to tie that in by the tip of the hackle. holding it in, and just a couple of wraps. Hold that on. Now this is the point where I want to put the thorax of the fly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip just a little bit of this moleskin. Just a touch of wax, just a touch, to make that thread a little bit tacky. Then take just this little tiny bit of mole fur. I said mole skin, we're not actually using the skin, which I'm sure makes the mole very happy. And you don't want to put it on too tight, you don't want to spin it on too tight, but just put a little bit on there. That's enough. Just a little tiny bit of a thorax. Now, with the soft hackle, you want to take one turn of hackle, no more than that. That is more than enough hackle. These flies should be tied extremely sparse. If you think you're using too much material, you absolutely are. If you think you're using just enough material, you're using twice what you should be. That's how thin they need to be. And that's what makes this fly come to life. Now let me tell you a little bit about the thorax too. Use the thorax when you're fishing these in faster water, moving streams, trout streams. Jim is going to be going up to fish the Ausable River, and this is ideal with a thorax pattern because that thorax holds the soft hackles out and gives it a little more action. If you're fishing these on a chalk stream, if you're fishing these, of course, the spring creeks of Pennsylvania, or if you're fishing these in a pond, going without the thorax allows the fly to compress a little bit more and gives you a little bit better action. So select that based not only on the fly that you want to imitate, but also on the kind of water that you're going to fish. Took that lesson from our bass fishing friends, I guess, matching the fly to the water. I made a simple 3-turn whip finish. Pull that tight. Clip off my thread. Now, if you remember when I waxed that wax was also on the thread. That's what actually will act as a binding agent to hold that together. You've got very small amount of hackle fibers, imitating the 6 legs that an insect has. This is ideal. That will absolutely fish for trout without a problem. Once again, you can tie that with or without a thorax. Just a fantastic pattern. Tie these in sizes from about a size 10 all the way down to as small as you can get, size 18 or size 20. I would rather leave home without my fly rod than leave home without a box of soft hackles if I was going trout fishing. Thanks for joining us on the 18th episode of Adventures in Fly Tying. Visit us on the web, www.flyfishohio.com. We'll see you next time. Tight lines.